Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. Today is another AMA episode. That is, Ask Me Anything. Now, I love to answer your questions, and if you have a question you think is going to be of broad interest, send it in. I'll answer it live on the air. Today's question, we're answering a listener question that is a very common question. On today's show, rather than answering the question directly, this is the synopsis of a conversation that I had with a developer at a conference this past weekend. I'm often approached by people who own land they would like to develop, or by those who want to operate a highly specialized event space for things like wellness retreats. This listener is looking at developing a large acreage north of Palm Desert, California. This is the place that's become famous for the massive Coachella music festival that in recent years has attracted as many as 250,000 people for those few days a year. The city of Palm Desert, next to Palm Springs, has developed near Interstate 10, that massive interstate that extends all the way from Florida to Los Angeles and hugs the Gulf Coast along the way. The city has developed completely to the south of I-10, and there's very little but desert to the north of the interstate highway. Developing the property would require rezoning the property to allow the proposed development. The developer I spoke with this past weekend desires to develop a wellness retreat on the acreage. The proposed project would consist of high-quality amenities, and the short-term rentals would be made from factory-built structures and assembled on site. Part of the concept is to have short-term rentals on the property, and short-term rentals are typically not branded properties. That means you're going to likely rely upon platforms like VRBO or AirBnB to market your property on a nightly basis. As the name implies, Palm Desert, this is in fact in a desert. The average rainfall in Palm Desert is about 6 inches of rainfall a year. That can range anywhere from a low of 3 inches per year to 10 inches per year of rainfall in a record year. All of that moisture from the Pacific Ocean gets deposited in the mountains before reaching the far side of the mountains, which is why we have desert on the inland side of the mountains. Now, when I'm presented with any concept for a new project, I always ask the same question. It doesn't matter whether the project is located in the core of a high-demand, high-density city or in a rural location. All real estate has to follow the laws of supply and demand. When I say real estate, I'm talking about the finished product. The question is there demonstrable demand for that specific product in that location where the demand is in excess of supply? You see, every single business venture needs to solve a problem. That problem needs to be acute enough to warrant spending money on, and you need to be attractive enough to the customer that they will buy that solution to that specific problem from you. Now, you might be wondering what problem a wellness retreat in the desert might have to do with an acute problem. For some people, they actively seek out a getaway in a serene, isolated location where they can disconnect and recharge. The problem with property in this location is twofold. Number one, it's the lack of municipal services. Specifically, we're talking about water and sewer. The lack of services is probably enough to kill any opportunity of developing anything of substance in this location. The area does not get enough annual rainfall to develop a sustainable reliance on an underground aquifer. In recent years, the sustainability calculations for groundwater has become much more stringent, much more conservative. Calculations that were commonplace 30 and 40 years ago have been shown to deplete the water table, and many locations have run dry. The second problem with this particular location is that there's not demonstrable demand. There are examples of properties that have been developed in remote locations that have been successful, but there's even more example of those that have failed. I'm simply not a believer in taking those types of speculative risks. I want to see demonstrable demand. That means numbers of comparable properties. Now, the Coachella Festival brings in huge demand, but it's only for a few nights out of the year. You can get those fabulous nightly rates for a few days, but your expenses need to carry the property for the entire year. While you might get a fantastic rate for those few days, you're also going to be paying a premium for other services like cleaning for those few days a year as well. The fact that the land in that location can be purchased inexpensively is not a surprise. The value of land is linked directly to what you can do with it. And there are literally thousands of acres of vacant land north of Interstate 10. Why will this specific plot of 130 acres become valuable? Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying that the data, as part of your due diligence, needs to demonstrate the viability of the project. It's got to show that the project makes financial sense. And so far, I've not heard anything that tells me the demand is going to justify the development, even if you could find the water. The final thing I'm going to say is that Palm Desert is a partly flying and partly driving destination. You do have decent airport service into Palm Springs, But the data for short-term rentals to driving destinations has been skewed by the pandemic. And once the pandemic is over, we will experience a resurgence of demand for international travel. We've got a brutal war going on in the Ukraine right now, which may have the effect of dampening demand for international travel for yet one more year. But destinations like Rome, London, Paris, Japan, Australia, they're going to be experiencing pent-up demand. And once people return to international air travel, there will not be the same demand for short-term rentals in driving destinations where you can continue to expect strong occupancy, but you're going to experience a much lower nightly rate. So I'm a little bit skeptical about the viability of the location and, in particular, the lack of utility infrastructure. This is my initial analysis without having done a tremendous amount of deep due diligence. But I want to thank you for an awesome conversation. And for the listeners at home, have a terrific rest of your day. Go make some great things happen, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.